Welcome to the second part of my summoning guide for Divinity Original Sin 2.
So, after we have covered the basics, let's get into some details. First, I will go over the basic summon spells, which will be the core of your build. Elemental Totem. This skill will create an immovable totem object on the position where you summon it. They cost 2 action points and will be on cooldown after placing them until your next turn. They will shoot 1 time per turn, up to 3 times in 3 turns, if they live long enough, and will be destroyed after that. The Elemental Totem does not count against your summon limit and will not destroy your pet or other totems when summoned. Since the duration of your totem is 3 turns, you can only have 3 of them active at a time. Totems have not much priority for enemy attacks, but the enemy will always try to include them in their area attacks, so spreading them out is recommended. If you have a non-glass cannon build and you stench, sometimes enemies will prioritize totems over your character. They will be generally destroyed after 1 hit from an enemy, greatly reducing the damage they could do over 3 turns. Totems will be infused to the element of the surface on which they were summoned and do damage of the respective type. Totems can cause status effects when hitting targets depending on the totem summoned. Totems in general take the role of your default attack when you have nothing else to do. They are relatively strong in the early game and fall off pretty hard later on, not only because the damage does not scale as well, but because in the later parts of the game you will have so many area of effect options for attacking and need so many action points for your skill combos that having 2 4 points to spare for a single target attack, which will get destroyed very quickly, is not going to happen often anymore. Poison totems can heal your undead characters, which can be useful sometimes, but the AI is so random when it comes to this healing that you don't want to use totems as your primary way of saving you when things go wrong. It's not reliable at all. There are 2 builds where totems can be a bit more useful. These are Hybrid Summoner, Arrowthurge, and Hydromancer builds. When you play these builds, you want these totems out not because of the damage they do, but because they constantly reapply Wedge status for Frost totems and Shock status for Electro totems. Electro totems will even shoot the ground when they are standing on water or blood to re-electrify it, potentially stunning faraway enemies that stand in the same water puddle. Having multiple characters with these builds in the party can generate so many little shocks that they can shut down entire groups of enemies through permanent reapplying crowd control. Frost totems are similar in a way that they reapply wedge statuses, so you need only a single frost cast from your Hydrothurge spells to freeze an enemy. Conjure Incarnate. This is your main summon. You can get it from level 1, and it will retain at least some of its usefulness till the end of the game. The Incarnate works in conjunction with the 4 infusion skills Farsight, Power, Shadow, and Warp. Farsight and Power will give a major buff to physical and magical armor, and each of the 4 will increase the damage of the Incarnate by 25% for a total of 100%. Sadly, this is not a multiplicative value, and since you already have a lot of damage boni from your summoning skill, it will be not as strong as you might hope after fully infusing it. The Incarnate itself costs 2 action points to summon, while each of the infusions costs 1 action point each, for a whopping total of 6 action points for a fully buffed Incarnate, making it the most expensive summon action point-wise. It lasts 10 rounds though, so it's recommended to summon and buff your Incarnate before the fight. If your summoning skill rank reaches 10 or above, your small Incarnate will be replaced with a bigger game model with much higher stats, almost doubling its damage when you jump from 9 to 10. Depending on if you play a persistent summoner build or a burst summoner, you should change your skill point allocation priority. If you go for the persistent route, it is wise to bring the Incarnate as quick as possible to 10, because in the beginning of the game he will be strong enough to even solo a couple of fights then. If you play a burst summoner build, it is wise to gain access to your other important skills like a Bloated Corpse and Fire Trap first. The Incarnate works similarly to the Totem, in a way that it will be infused with the element of the surface you summon it on. Depending on the elemental infusion, it will gain access to one element-specific skill, which are Fireball for Fire Infusion, Electric Discharge for Electric Infusion, Fossil Strike for Earth Infusion, Restoration for Water Infusion, Poison Dart for Poison Infusion, and Mosquito Swarm for Blood Infusion. Additionally, these infusions, aside from Blood and Earth, are also available as abilities which you can cast upon your Incarnate to override its current element for the cost of 1 action point. They are obtainable through crafting by combining 2 spell books, one of the respective element, and 1 summoning book. Elemental infusions will cost a lot of action points and memory, if you take them all, while surfaces can hold multiple rounds, can be used for your totems as well, can be cast before the fight or cast from other group members, making it the better strategy in general, with electric infusions being the big exception, since electric charged surfaces are more short-lived and don't happen so often, if you are not using them intentionally. So taking electric infusion is advised if you want to play with electric incarnate. If you cast an elemental infusion of another element after he has used his element-specific skill, he will gain access to the new one while the old one is on cooldown, being able to rotate through all of the elements 1 per turn for 1 action point per round. In the early game, this might be a consideration since the elemental skills are a bit stronger than his other attacks damage-wise. The 4 base infusions, Farsight, Power, Shadow, Warp, each unlock additional skills for your Incarnate. Farsight unlocks a default range attack, Power unlocks Battering Ram and Whirlwind, Shadow unlocks Chameleon Cloak and Corrupted Blade, and Warp unlocks Tactical Retreat and the ability to switch places with its summoner when he is in range of the skill. The Farsight range attack is a bit stronger than a default attack from the Incarnate and can be used once per round. If you have an electric infused Incarnate and the target is standing on water or blood, and you target the point at the feet of the target near the ground, it will do its skill damage as well as electrifying the ground, possibly leading to stunning a target. If you hit the ground with its default attack by clicking while holding Control, it will electrify the ground as well. This can be useful if you want to summon more electro-infused totems and need electrified water for that. The poison-infused Incarnate ranged attack, as well as its melee attacks, can heal undead for quite a bit, practically having the possible option to let your Incarnate be a heal bot that fully heals your player each turn by attacking twice. This is at least much more controllable than the totem-based poison healing, but in the end, you most likely will not play a summoner to just heal a party member when your Incarnate can outright kill many enemies in early and mid-game, and when you could, as an undead, just eat a poisoned meal for 1 action point. The Battering Ram skill is especially useful for your Blood Incarnate, since he can quickly down physical armor for a nice crowd control option. You can even use the Incarnate as a quick targeted ranged crowd control with just the Power Infusion, knocking down a couple of enemies for 3 action points that have no physical armor, but of course this would unsummon your old Incarnate. Whirlwind is a solid area of effect skill, which will take the element from your infusion. There's a strong synergy with Battering Ram, Whirlwind Strike, and Master of Sparks, but we cover that later. Chameleon Cloak from Shadow Infusion is great if you want to finish buffing your Incarnate over the course of 2 turns while letting him do just 1 action and then put him right into cloak mode where he will not be attacked. So you can peacefully buff him up, accumulate X action points, and then use all his strong attacks in one go. Alternatively, it's very good if you want to include your Incarnate in an Apotheosis combo and don't want him to be dead or stunned by the time you need him. Corrupted Strike is especially useful if you have a Necromancer hybrid build, since he will provide another source of decay. Tactical Retreat, of course, is generally very useful, even summons value mobility skills. The Swept Teleport skill can be used as an emergency teleport if you need to move quickly but don't have any teleports off cooldown. Just resummon your Incarnate on the location where you want to be, and when he takes his turn, he can switch places with you, functioning as a patchwork teleport. Additionally, we have the Source Infusions, Acid Infusion, Cursed Electric Infusion, Ice Infusion, and Necrofire Infusion. They are obtainable as well through crafting by combining 2 spellbooks, one of the respective element, and 1 summoning book. One of them must be a source skill. They cost 1 action point and 2 source points each. They are very expensive source point-wise and will not have the same power as their non-summon counterpart cast by a specialized player character. Generally, it's not advised to use them over other source skills except inside an Apotheosis burst window, where your source point cost is 0 and they cost only 1 action point. Even then, they are generally more powerful options, and if you want to have multiple of them so you can cycle through Fire, Electricity and Acid during the 3 turns, it still would cost you 6 memory slots, which is a little bit too expensive for what they can do. But at least it's an option during Apotheosis. Bloated Corpse. This is one of your first available burst pets. You need a corpse to create this, but you can even cast it on destroyed corpses from spells like Corpse Explosion and similar stuff. The corpse will be destroyed, so you can't use Corpse Explosion on a corpse from where you summoned the Bloated Corpse, but you can cast Bloated Corpse on corpses destroyed by Corpse Explosion. The Bloated Corpse will leave behind a trail of blood when moving, making it useful for creating blood-infused totems and blood elemental affinity. It has low health and will generally die in 1 to 2 hits from most enemies. Its special ability allows it to detonate, doing a good chunk of physical damage in a small radius. Using this ability will destroy the Bloated Corpse. This can't be prevented by death protection effects. Since it will die anyway, it's always useful to enhance it with Supercharger. This combination is extremely strong in Act 1 and remains useful till the end of the game, but there are stronger combos later on. Bone Spider. You can get this summoning after Act 1 from Necromancy traders. It requires 2 points in Necromancy. This will summon a spider pet with a big health pool and decent physical armor, but without magical armor for 2 action points. Since it's a Necromancy skill, you can reduce its action points cost to 1 via Elemental Affinity and standing in blood puddles. It comes with 2 skills. The first one allows it to teleport, and the second regenerates its health and gives it a damage buff after consuming a corpse. This is your most cost-efficient pet in your arsenal, since it is doing almost the same damage as your fully buffed Blood Incarnate. Because it is so cheap to cast, it can fill a lot of tactical roles, from being a switch object for Nether Swap, doing a no source point single target physical burst with Enrage, gathering enemies with invisibility and living on the edge, or just plain old tanking some ranged enemies when your Incarnate is down and on cooldown. While it's not the most damaging or powerful pet altogether, and doesn't have a role in your most powerful burst combos, it remains a useful damaging utility tool throughout the entire game. Throw explosive traps and deploy mass traps. Throw explosive traps can be crafted from a hunter and a pyrokinetic skill book and requires 1 skill point in both skills to learn. Deploy mass traps can be crafted in the same way, but one of the 2 books must be a source skill book. It requires 2 points in each skill to use. Throw explosive trap costs 1 action point to use, while deploy mass traps cost 3. Both skills will create 1, or in the case of mass explosive trap, 4 traps that can be thrown on the ground. Like all summonings, they will get their turn right after you and then instantly detonate when an enemy is inside their circle, or detonate during your turn if triggered by attacking it or throwing it on a fire surface. If you want your pet to get their turn before your trap, you must use your trap first and then summon a pet, which will then get the next turn before the trap can detonate. The traps, like totems, don't count against your summon limit. Explosive traps do fire damage when detonating and will take the damage profile of which entity detonates the trap as their damage profile, and if thrown on a fire surface, it will take the damage profile of the creator or the last entity that expanded the surface as their damage profile. This useful attribute is another puzzle piece for our most damaging combos, since you can make your summoned pets the detonator of the traps, or the owner of the fire surface your traps are detonating on. Throw explosive trap is obtainable before level 4 and is in conjunction with Bloated Corpse and Supercharger part of your first early game massive burst combo. Mass explosive traps can be crafted the moment you get your hands on either a Hunter or a Pyrokinetic Source skillbook. It plays a big role in our strongest Apotheosis burst combos and is part of your strongest one source point burst with an almost guaranteed kill for a quick source snack via Source Vampirism the next turn on the freshly generated corpse. There are a couple of summoning skills that are viable as trap detonators. These are Fire Incarnate, Bloated Corpse, Oily Blob, WindUpToy, and Fire Snail. The Fire Incarnate is potentially the strongest detonator. It comes with Pyromancy 5 in its base version and Pyromancy 10 its cursed version, and also being boosted by the 4 Incarnate infusion, significantly boosting the fire trap's power. But it has a disadvantage when it comes to its opportunity cost in terms of its cooldown, that you might want to use it otherwise than sacrifice it for a small burst, or the action point cost is too high for the situation. Summon Oily Blob. This is a polymorph summon skill which can be learned from polymorph skillbook traders from Act 2 on. It requires polymorph 2 and costs 2 action points. The Oily Blob is extremely vulnerable and, like the Bloated Corpse, will most likely not survive more than one hit. It can cast the skills Turn to Oil and Fossil Strike. In general, this is a rather poor summon, but it has its place. First, if you want to cast Turn to Oil and Fossil Strike at some point, you can free the memory slot by using this instead, gaining access to both. The other thing is that this is one of the summonings that can effectively detonate a Fire Trap Supercharger combo, and it's not the worst choice doing that. Its advantage here is that it's a polymorph skill, and when you are playing a burst-oriented summoner, you will have to spec into polymorph 5 anyways for Apotheosis. The other thing is that it's magical damage, and while the Bloated Corpse detonator is more effective action point and damage-wise, the Oily Blob doesn't need a corpse to be summoned. Its detonating initial strike does magical damage which pairs better with Fire Trap than the mixed damage from Bloated Corpse, depending on the encounter. It is not being destroyed from the detonation, meaning it can still prevent a single hit from an enemy before it dissipates. That would otherwise have hit the player character, and it can detonate the Fire Trap from afar, which can be useful in situations where enemies have disabling auras. This is a skill which is so practical in terms of ease of access that I found myself more often using it for the burst combos than its raw power would have justified. WindUpToy. This is a Scoundrel summon. It requires 3 points in Scoundrel and is available from traders at level 16. It costs 2 action points and, like the Bloated Corpse, can detonate itself in a big radius for decent damage. It can be used from stealth. This one compares in its use case to the Oily Blob. It's technically a little bit stronger when it comes to pure damage, but like the Oily Blob and Corpse, it doesn't have skill points in Pyromancy despite it being doing fire damage. And like the other two, it will be destroyed rather quickly. I don't find it to be so much more useful than the Oily Blob that it justifies the 3-point investment into Scoundrel, but it's an option as an alternative Fire Trap detonator. It leaves behind a big fire surface. One side use would be to not use it in the Fire Trap combo, but after you activate Chameleon Cloak, to stack up your action points and delay your turn while you are invisible for a small bonus bang. Fire Snail. This one is available as a 1-point source Pyromancy skillbook in Act 2. It costs 1 action point and requires 3 points in Pyromancy. It has Pyromancy 5 and 2 skills, Battering Ram and Laser Ray. Fire Snail is a very powerful spell in the hands of a burst summoner and allows for a lot of different combos, including 1-point source burst combos with fire traps, full Apotheosis fire trap burst combos, persistent uptime with Master of Sparks, haste and Door to Eternity, after the last round of Apotheosis, or before level 16 3-point burst combos with Master of Sparks, haste and deploy mass traps and Supercharger for total destruction. Laser Ray is already a very strong skill on itself on the Fire Slug. Once you master this slimy microwave, you can't live without. The other 1 source point summon. Available from Act 2 Geomancy traders and require 3 points into Geomancy. Base action points cost is 2 and works with elemental affinity if on poison or oil surface. A general good and useful summoning which is sadly outclassed by all damaging burst combos for your other summons. It has 3 skills: a very strong single target melee attack for 3 action points, an acid spore projectile similar to the acid spore source skill but only casts 1 projectile instead of 3 but with a really short cooldown, and a poison mist area attack. All of them hit relatively hard as a base value. Since poison is even more resisted in the game than fire, and there are not so many fights where you would want to take this over another pet to overcome immunities, and the source point in its cost doesn't justify what it can do later in the game, it performs relatively bad despite its rather good base stats. It would work as a persistent summoning style pet, but then there are so many poison immune enemies and the base strength of your summonings drops so low without bursting. In the end, I found myself only ever using it for testing purposes, but not ever for effectivity. You can use it for a quick rage haste supercharger combo for a single target, or without haste for poison AoE bursting, but it's not breathtaking. It can heal your undead characters for a good chunk of health though. Totems or the Necromancer. This is the only 3-point source skill which scales with a summoning attribute. It's a Necromancer skill and requires 5 points to be able to use it. It can be acquired after level 16 from Necromancy traders. It costs 2 action points and it works with elemental affinity, reducing it to 1 action point and making it very cheap and easy to use in combos. In a large radius, it summons from every enemy and for every corpse 1 bone totem. They do physical damage, there is no limit to the number of totems you can spawn from this. They do non-trivial damage on their own, which can quickly ramp up depending on the number of enemies and corpses. If the totems are created while standing on a damaging surface like Cursed Fire, they will not take enough damage to die instantly, but they will die before they can take their first turn. The totems are most effective if there are more corpses than living enemies. If you compare their damage to other 3-point spells that last multiple turns and affect a wide area like Bloodstorm or Lightning Storm, these spells will do more damage to the enemies. But the ability to not lose any damage when enemies die or are already dead make them extremely deadly for the surviving enemies, allowing the totems to focus fire. In other words, they are best used after a massive area attack, killing many enemies, and then raise the bone totems to get rid of the remaining opponents. This ability is available at the same moment Apotheosis is available in the game. In general, you will never want to use this spell outside of Apotheosis and Skingraft. When you do a full combo, double casting it with the help of Skingraft and amplifying it with Venomous Aura, you can do easily over 10,000 damage per turn to the remaining enemies, making it extremely deadly in boss battles with lots of adds. Besides deploy Mass Fire Trap, this is the other spell which can carry you through the most difficult fights and making the Burst Summoner playstyle really strong. Funny enough, none of the summoning scaling heavy hitting spells is actually on the summoning spell list. Strange design. There are a couple more pets you can summon, which are only available as a reward for certain story events or in the case of Ifan, his personal racial ability. I will cover very roughly how to get these spells. Summon Ifan's Soul Wolf. This pet costs 3 action points and 1 source point. It is relatively similar to the Bone Spider in that it has a rather chunky health pool, almost 6,000 compared to the Spider's 5,000, at summoning 10 at level 20. And like the Spider, it has almost 1,000 physical armor. The Spider's attacks are almost 50% stronger. It can cause bleed and has an area taunt in a medium radius, which makes it the only pet with an actual taunt. So it's not a bad pet to have if you want to play Ifan, but Faint's Time Warp definitely plays in another league. So it's not the best choice from a power perspective, but it could be worse for a summoner build. Summon Cat Familiar. The cat is the first story-related pet you can acquire. After you land on the beach, you will encounter a cat, close to the location where you find Fane. If you can keep the cat alive until you leave the Magister's fort, she will give you the spell to summon her after leaving the Magister's area. She costs 2 action points to summon. She has not much HP, but she's not as vulnerable as the Bloated Corpse, and she is really not doing much damage. Her main benefits are that she can cast Swept Places and Feline Leap. These are both maneuver spells, the first being a teleportation action and the second allowing her to swap places with her summoner. It's a nice gimmick, but I see no point in using it longer than Act 1. Everything it can do, other summons or spells can do as well or better. And since you can only have one summon on the field, it should not be the cat. Sorry, cat. Summon Condor. You can acquire the spell from the Condor on top of a tower at the Reaper's Coast graveyard. If you can convince it, it will give you the spell to summon it. Like the cat, the Condor is no powerhouse. It costs 2 action points to summon. It has the actions Fly, Peck, and Gust. Fly makes it very mobile and can be used every round. Peck can set blinded to a single enemy, and Gust can clear non-cursed surfaces. Like the cat, there are better options to summon. Dragon Child. You can get this spell from an egg, which lies invisible on a small table behind the Lizard Queen after you met her in the portal at the Lizard's embassy in Act 4 late in the game. You have to talk to it with a reptile character or an undead shapeshifted into a lizard. It costs 2 action points and takes up 2 memory slots despite not costing any source points. It is very roughly comparable in power to the Bone Spider, but with a couple more abilities, and it's quite tanky. It can cast Spitfire, Firebrand, Flaming Tongs, Ignition, and Flight. Spitfire is a small radius fireball. Flight can be used every turn. The rest of the abilities are like their spell counterparts. Sadly, it has no points in Pyromancy despite being a fire pet and is not especially useful for supercharged fire trap combos. Its most outstanding quality is that it bleeds blessed fire, so it can get rid of cursed surfaces when it stands on them and is hit by physical damage. All in all, a good pet to have. And like the Incarnate, it's more of a persistent pet than a burst pet, which comes so late in the game you will not get much playtime out of it. Summon Poison Slug. This pet is a bound spell with 5 charges on a wand that you get after killing a certain dwarf in Act 4 that can be found when you first enter the dwarven villa where the wedding takes place in Arx. He will try to convince you to attempt an assassination for him and can then be found later in a hidden laboratory. It summons a poison slug which lasts for 3 turns, has moderate health and damage, less than the Bone Spider, but has a poison variant of Red Princess Fire Breath attack. Summon Inner Demon. This spell can be acquired as a reward in Act 2 from Jahan if you do his Master quest from the Powerful Awakening questline. Technically, this does not summon an entity on the field, but is a buff that you can cast on yourself. It costs action points and increases your intelligence by 6, which equals an additive bonus of 30% to your spell damage and gives you more magic armor and immunity to be terrified. It allows you to cast Demonic Turtleage and Terrify. Demonic Turtleage will attack every approaching creature, just like Flaming Tongs, but with physical damage, and Terrify is a range attack which can destroy magic armor that can be cast every round while Summon Inner Demon is active, and terrifies a single enemy if it has none. For our summoner, there's a very niche use for this. If we are doing a Totem of the Necromancer into Thick of the Fight combo, and we have built for crit, for example, on a Lone Dwarf Summoner hybrid, these 6 points intelligence could give us an even greater damage boost for 2 turns on top of Thick of the Fight. But outside of that is not very useful for a burst summoner.
In the next part of the Summoner's Guide, I will give you an introduction to the most useful utility spells that support our summoning spell list. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.